thanks, guys. It's very nice I'm very glad to have been invited here today. I'm very glad to talk a little bit about mindfulness. And I always feel a little uncomfortable when I come to talk to people who have had cancer or have cancer. I don't. But what I do share, or what we do share in common, are our hearts and minds. We, as human beings, share minds that most often have minds of their own and can drive us to distraction. And we have hearts of our own, emotions of our own, that can really at times be very difficult to manage. So I'm really happy to talk about some of that today. A couple of weeks ago, I was leaving the hospital, and I had sent some stuff to the photocopier, and I thought I'd grab that on my way out because I was in a hurry. And when I got down to the photocopier, it wouldn't do what it was being told to do. And I got really frustrated and annoyed, and probably used some very colourful language because I was in a hurry and it wasn't cooperating. And a colleague of mine passed and said, "Oh, Paul, that's not really very mindful of you, is it?" And I think he kind of said something about Mr. Mindfulness, or, you know, that, what is this? And that really got me thinking. I thought, that's interesting, isn't it? That if you are practicing mindfulness, or if you're mindful, it means you don't get annoyed, or pissed off, or frustrated, or, you know, that there's a perception there that if we're mindful, we don't do those things. And I thought, that's absolutely wrong. That is not what mindfulness is about. And then I was kind of looking a bit at, you know, the advertising that's often done for mindfulness courses. And they generally involve an image of a woman, very well proportioned, perfectly proportioned even, sitting on a beach, all calm and serene. Or if you say to people, you know, tell me something, what do you think mindfulness is? People generally say things like, oh, it means being calm, and it means being in the moment, and it means being chilled and relaxed. So both the image of someone sitting cross-legged on a beach, calm and serene, and our understanding that mindfulness means being calm and chilled all the time is inaccurate. It's not true. And not only is it not true, but it's also potentially dangerous. Because if we believe, or if we're told that there is a way to become completely stress-free and calm all the time, that can really get us into trouble as human beings. Because that's not possible. There are five, what I've kind of called, or loosely called, the five kind of myths, or the five misunderstandings of mindfulness. And the first one is that mindfulness can make us calm all the time. You know, stress has got a bad reputation, okay? We, as human beings, cannot live without a degree of stress. So we all experience stress in our lives, right? To expect that we can live a life stress-free is just not possible. That's not going to happen. We need, as human beings, to experience a degree of stress. And stress, as I say, has got a bad reputation, not only as something very unpleasant and something that we want to get rid of, but also something that causes serious disease. So we've got to be very careful. People like me in this business have got to be very careful about how we present and how we talk about stress. As human beings, our existence depends on a degree of stress. We wouldn't have made it here today without being stressed in some way. Our survival depends on it. I've said a couple of times, and people have thought that I was joking, that our brains, these brains of ours, were not designed for happiness. They were designed to survive. And part of the surviving is experiencing stress in our lives as human beings. Stress is inevitable. It will be a part of our lives. What mindfulness does is give us a way to deal with stress differently. So it will not take it away. And anyone who tells you that mindfulness will is telling you lies. But what it does do is give us a way to respond and relate to the stress of our lives in a healthier way. The other second kind of myth or misunderstanding of mindfulness that I come across all the time is that when people face a crisis in their lives, so when people are diagnosed with cancer, when they lose someone they love, when they divorce, when they hit a crisis, when they hit one of those really, really serious speed bumps in life, that the response very often now is, oh, you need to go and do a mindfulness course. That mindfulness is the response to ordinary human unhappiness and the events that hit us in our lives. And it is not. We've been teaching mindfulness programs, the 8-week program in St. Vincent's, for almost 10 years. And we've had about 400 cancer patients do the 8-week mindfulness program. And we've learned a couple of things over the years. But one of the things that we've learned is that the 8-week mindfulness program is generally best done after people have completed their treatment, their surgery, their chemotherapy, their radiotherapy. That mindfulness is best undertaken at that point. And there's a few reasons for that. A mindfulness program is really demanding. 8 weeks, it's 2 months, 2.5 hours a week of class, and 40 minutes homework a day, right? So it's really demanding. So we need something in the tank, physically and emotionally and psychologically, in order to do mindfulness. And the same is true of people who have significant mental health difficulty. That's not the time to do mindfulness. The same is true of someone who has lost someone that they love. That's not the time to do mindfulness. At those points in our lives, we've got to take care of the basics. We've got to take care of our sleep, our exercise, and our diet. And as importantly, we've got to take care of our social connections, our social support. Because we know from all of the literature, all of the research conducted over the last several decades, that what gets people through a crisis in their lives isn't mindfulness. It's social connection. It's social support. That's not to say that mindfulness, if you have trained in mindfulness, it will not be very helpful when the next speed bump arrives, because it will. At that point, yes, but not in the eye of the storm. It's really, really important to say that and to be very clear about that. We've got to, at that point, as I say, look after the basics, steady the ship. John Kabat-Zinn is the person responsible, I suppose, for introducing mindfulness in healthcare back in the 70s. And John said at one point, he said, you know, we've got to weave our parachute every day, right? Not wait for the crisis to hit. So we've got to psychologically, emotionally prepare ourselves every day to weave the parachute that can help us cope with what life throws at us, not when we're in the eye of the storm. John Kabat-Zinn also said, when he talked about mindfulness very recently, he said, you know, I think we got the name wrong. He said, I don't think we should have called it mindfulness at all. And I thought, God, I wonder now what he's going to say about that. And he said, you know, I think really what it should have been called is heartfulness. That we actually, by calling it mindfulness, we place the emphasis on the wrong part of us, on our minds, when in fact the emphasis perhaps is better placed on our heart, on our emotional connection with ourselves and with other human beings. Someone described recently at one of the courses in the program that how over the years her heart, emotional self, had become encased in plaque. That we, as human beings, can get very afraid in our lives, and we can close down emotionally and psychologically, and our hearts close. So mindfulness that doesn't involve a connection with the heart and a connection with deep compassion for oneself and other people, in fact, isn't mindfulness at all. It's a bit of a misnomer, I think, mindfulness. The idea that mindfulness is the answer to all emotional ills is not only unhelpful, I think at times actually it's quite dangerous. There's a lot that we don't know about mindfulness. So it's kind of like mindfulness has got really popular, right? But our research is only catching up with it. So there's a lot that we don't know. Its popularity has resulted in it outpacing what we know in terms of its capacity to help or not to help in certain situations. And there is a tendency by some people, and I've probably been guilty of it myself, but there is a tendency by some people to overstate the benefits of mindfulness. So you'll hear people say all sorts of fantastic things about significant changes in brain functioning and significant impact on levels of depression. And all of those things are indicated, but we need to be careful and not to overstate. The first major big trial of mindfulness that was done in the UK, in any part of the world, was done in the UK 11 years ago. And what they found in that big study with 500 or 600 patients in it, and what they found in that was, yes, mindfulness was as effective as antidepressant medication for people who had 3 or more episodes of depression. For those who had less than 3, some people, it had a negative effect on some people who had less than 3 episodes. So we need to be careful about that. That's not what we kind of hear in popular commentary on mindfulness. So we know that it works, but we need to be careful about overstating what it does. The fifth myth associated with mindfulness is the idea that the present moment is the place that we should all live in. And I personally think that sometimes the present moment is the place that has been overrated. That the present moment actually may not be the best place for us to be in all the time. So you kind of hear this in people's language about, oh, you know, I want to live in the present moment. And that's probably a wonderful aspiration. But there are times in our lives when the present moment is just too difficult to be in. And sometimes it's a really good idea to distract ourselves with the busyness that we're all very familiar with. Because sometimes the present moment is a little overwhelming. There's a danger in, again, in overemphasizing the benefit of living in the present moment. We, in the hospital, having taught mindfulness, as I said, for many years, we have noticed that as human beings, you know, many of us, most of us, have spent our lives on the run. We've spent our lives running from ourselves, psychologically and emotionally. And you know what? Sometimes there's really good reason for that. Because we have histories and we have childhoods and we have experiences that are sometimes very difficult for us to remember and be present to. So a lot of us have spent our lives on the run, and sometimes for a very good reason. So asking people to stop or learning to stop needs to be done wisely and in a very timely manner. And it also needs to be done by people who are trained very well to do that. So, like psychotherapy and counseling, mindfulness teachers are in no way regulated at all. So often what happens is sometimes the most vulnerable people end up on the doorstep of a counselor or a psychotherapist or a mindfulness teacher looking for help. And we don't, those people and those professions are not regulated. So we can't say anything about the quality of their training. Now that to me is something that we need to address, and address as a matter of urgency. So in the meantime, what I say to people is the old kind of buyer beware, that if you're going to do a mindfulness training program, or indeed if you're going to go and see a counselor or a psychotherapist, you just got to be really careful about that. Because anyone in the room here could put the plaque up on the gate in the morning and saying that you're a psychotherapist or counselor. So we've got some work to do on that. And that also overlaps, as I say, with mindfulness training and mindfulness teachers. Probably one of the most important misunderstandings of mindfulness is that it is a quick fix. Mindfulness is not a quick fix. The standard mindfulness course takes 2 months, as I say, 2.5 hours a week, over 2 months. And this is because it takes a lot of time to change the psychological habits that we have built up over a lifetime. We have habits of a lifetime that require a long time to begin to change. There is a real danger that mindfulness will be turned into a quick fix, a way to fix ourselves. And if we approach mindfulness as a kind of a self-improvement project, we're going to get into an awful lot of trouble. The paradox, the contradiction kind of looking in on mindfulness is that mindfulness begins to work when we stop trying to fix ourselves, when we leave ourselves alone emotionally and psychologically, when we begin to realize that actually, as I am right now, I am more than okay. The opposite to feeling okay about who we are, the widespread self-criticism that goes on for most of the human race, and to some extent, the self-hatred that goes on for a large proportion of the human race is, I believe, probably the psychological cancer of our time, the self-hatred and the self-criticism that drives people to all sorts of really, really unhelpful and dangerous behaviors. Alcohol, drug abuse, self-harm. And at a lower level, for most of us who experience a degree, varying degrees of self-dislike, a lot of the times when we just don't like ourselves. We're not good enough, we're not clever enough, we're not smart enough, we're not. In fact, sometimes we're just not enough, or we feel that we're just not enough. Mindfulness is often suggested as a way to fix that feeling of not being good enough. And we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful on that one. Because if we approach ourselves as something that's broken and needs to be fixed, we'll continue in that cycle of not good enough. There's a recent enough paper by, I forget his name, a psychologist in Yale, a research psychologist, who said, you know, why psychologists are falling out of love with self-esteem. And as you know, for decades probably, any difficulty that people had, young people had, a lot of the kind of stuff you might see in disadvantaged communities or in self-harm, we think, oh, you know, they've just got really poor self-esteem. And they're beginning to say now, actually, well, we might have overrated self-esteem. And there's a problem with it, because self-esteem is always based on me being better than someone else. It's always based on me being at least average, so someone being not as good as, not as smart as, right? So it gets us on a treadmill there, and in many ways is not a very good model for society, where I only feel okay about myself if I'm better than 49% of society. So we're beginning to rethink it a little bit. And in the rethink, people are beginning to say, well, actually, what might be a better model, what might be a better way to understand the difficulty that we experience as human beings and as a society is compassion and self-compassion. So not self-esteem, but actually self-compassion is being suggested as a better predictor of psychological well-being, of being at ease, and a suggestion too that it might be a better way for us to think about how we organize our society and our lives. That can I be kind, can I understand, and can I accept myself as I am right now and not needing to be fixed. The problem is, with a lot of other models, including some of how mindfulness is used, is that we turn ourselves, we turn me, Paul, you, Mary, into a self-improvement project. And we live our lives as a self-improvement project. And I've lived like that for quite a bit of my life, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting, and you never get there. And I've worked with people at the end of their lives who have lived like that, and they've told me the same thing. It's exhausting. If we live our lives as self-improvement project, we miss the beauty in our lives. We miss the moments of joy and connection because we are distracted by trying to improve ourselves and our situation. We had a class in the hospital, a mindfulness class, a group in the hospital, and their group, a monthly group of patients who have all done the 8-week training, and they come back once a month and we do some mindfulness exercises together. But we were talking a little bit about this, about living our lives as self-improvement. And we agreed towards the end of the class that what we would do is live our lives becoming a compassionate mess. So we don't need to be together or complete or perfect. But if we could set our target, if we could set our intention to become a compassionate mess, it's certainly some of my experience and some of my understanding that we would live happier lives, more connected lives. And I think it would make for a kinder society where these minds of ours that have minds of their own could potentially be put to better use. Our connection to ourselves and our connection to other human beings is what matters most. It's what matters in times of crisis. It's what matters at times of joy. And it's what matters at the end of our lives. So people like me and psychologists and lots of other people who maybe unintentionally have maybe misguided us a little bit over the years. Maybe we need to kind of be a little bit more honest about what we know really matters at the moment and in the end. None of that is to say that we should not take action in our lives. There's people often say to me, God, you know, Paul, if I become compassionate, right, sure, I wouldn't get out of the bed. If I became self-compassionate, I would lose the run of myself. I'd eat and drink and sure, what would I do? I'd lose the run of myself. And so that fear is probably related to a slight misunderstanding of what it means to be compassionate. So the Dalai Lama, who apparently knows a thing or two about compassion, said that that compassion is about identifying, being with my suffering, right? So knowing when I psychologically and emotional suffering, so not running away from it, turning up to the fact that I feel pretty awful about myself, right? That this is painful, I'm anxious, I'm scared, I'm afraid, right? We turn up to that, we stop running away from it and go, actually, this is pretty shit. We turn up to it. But number two, the Dalai Lama says, that has to be accompanied by a desire to get to the root of that, to get to the root of our suffering. And it often means that we need to take action. So being compassionate actually means we sometimes take very firm action in our lives. And very often it means saying no. And lots of people don't like that when we begin to say no. Lots of us find ourselves in situations, in work or in family situations, in certain roles that are unhelpful and cause us to suffer a lot. So compassion is about acknowledging my psychological, emotional suffering, but also taking action. And that action, as I say, can be about saying no, and a very radical no. So, compassionate mess as the target and direction that we might set ourselves. I put it out there as as an option. I put it out there as a way to think about how we might live these very precious lives that we have, and how we might begin to live our lives not as a project, as a self-improvement project, but we might begin to live our lives knowing that actually, as I am right now, I'm okay. Thank you.